If you're still running your backend on Airtable or Google Sheets, then it's time for an upgrade. Because once your n8n workflow scales, those tools start to crack. But with Supabase and n8n, you can automate, store, and sync data just like a developer without being one. That's why in this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about using Supabase with n8n. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. First, we'll jump into Supabase, set up a project, and I'll show you guys the UI a little bit. Next, I'll explain the difference between the Postgres node and the Supabase node and why you want to stick to using the Postgres node. Then, we'll connect Supabase to n8n. Next, I'll show you how to create tables inside of Supabase. Then we'll do some basic CRUD operations with that table using n8n. Next, I'll give you guys some advanced tips and tricks so that you guys know how to use Supabase. Okay, I just jumped into a freshly created Supabase account, so let's go ahead and create a new project here. Give it a database password. Be sure to save this database password because you will need it. My password is subscribenow123, so be sure to steal it. Beautiful, and all the other settings you don't have to touch. Sweet, now the project is all set up. So here's the Supabase UI. You're going to be spending most of your time between table editor, SQL editor, and database, okay? You might spend a little bit of time in edge functions down here or authentication. Now that's if you're building SaaS apps or using Supabase as the backend itself and maybe not n8n. But let me show you what these look like. Here in the table editor, we can create new tables, call them whatever we want, and put columns. These columns are like columns in your Excel sheet. So they're pretty good. For example, here we could put like lead list, and we could put the name, the email, things like that. But this is slow and we don't want to be doing it this way. So I'll show you a much quicker way to build tables here in a little bit. Once you have a table created, you can click on this definition here, and it shows how the table is created. Now this is really great when you're prompting ChatGPT because you can say, hey, I have this table here and copy paste it. Be like, I need to grab all of the leads in this table who haven't been contacted in the last 2 weeks, right? And it'll spit out an SQL query that you can then run in n8n or here in Supabase in order to get that data, which I'll show you where to do that now. If you go to SQL editor here, you can write your own custom SQL queries. Now an SQL query is basically, as I just said, like get all members where they last contacted was within the last 2 weeks, or update all members that were added in the last 2 hours to where contacted is true. Right, so that's a basic idea of how to do SQL queries. Now you can write them here, and then once you write them here, you can actually save them, so then you can use them later, and that's very useful. We'll mostly be using this to create tables themselves, not so much for filtering the data because we'll be doing that more on the n8n side of things. Next here we have the database. This is really, really great for visually seeing how the database works together because we might have a lead list here and we might have a table of companies, right? So these leads connect to companies so we can see how that relationship works, how those two tables connect, right? And then we can copy as SQL. We can use that again with ChatGPT for prompting and stuff. Next here we have authentication. Now this is if you wanted to use this as a SaaS. Lovable connects really well with this portion. You just tell Lovable to connect with Supabase, you authorize it, and it will use this table as a backend for all the users in your application, which is amazing. It saves a lot of time work and coding. In terms of n8n, you probably won't be touching this very much, but for other no-code apps, you might be using this portion. Next, we have storage buckets. Now, this is to store files and stuff. Again, you probably won't be touching that too much with n8n, but it is there in case you guys need it. Next, we have our edge functions. Now, this is really cool. Here, you can write custom code that Supabase runs every time a record's updated or on timers or whenever you press a button, right? And this is really good if you wanted to use the Supabase as the back end of a SaaS app, maybe something you built out in Lovable. It wouldn't be a traditional backend, but there are some SaaSes that run just React frontend with Supabase backend. They are serverless and they do work. It's not bad. Here we have our secrets. Now this is where you can save different API keys and things. So if you have OpenAI here, you can save it here under the secrets and it is securely saved in your Supabase account. You don't ever want to save any API keys in code. That's a bad idea. Don't do that. Again, with n8n, you probably won't be using this because you'll save your API keys inside of n8n. And then outside of that, we have here our project settings, which of course we can go through and change some stuff. The only thing you're really going to be messing with here is up here when you click on connect, which is how we connect our Supabase to n8n, and I'll show you guys that very shortly. Let's talk about the Postgres node and the Supabase node and why you guys want to use the Postgres node. There are two main problems with the Supabase node. First, it is slower, and second, it has limitations. How is it slower? Well, Supabase uses AWS or Amazon for its backend databases. They're built out in Postgres. So when you use the Supabase node, n8n is doing an API call to Supabase, which then does another API call to your Amazon server. Then the Amazon server will respond to Supabase, and then the Supabase will respond back to n8n. So technically you have a man in the middle that's doing all the communication. Whereas if you use just the Postgres node, you can skip Supabase and go directly to the AWS Postgres instance. So n8n does an API call to Postgres, and Postgres does an API call back to n8n, eliminating Supabase. What are the limitations to the Supabase node? Well, first of all, you don't have Upsert. What is Upsert? Upsert means update a record if it's found, and if not, insert a new record. Supabase doesn't have that. It also doesn't have Upsert in bulk, right? So say you have 1,000 records, and if they find the user or the email address in those records, you want to update all the other information that's found. And if it's not there, then just add a new record. You cannot do that with the Supabase node. If I go here and I type in Supabase, we have create, delete, get many rows, and update a row, right? We don't have create many rows. We don't have update many rows. We don't have Upsert. And we don't have the ability to do custom SQL queries. Okay, and that is huge because I'll tell you, maybe half or a little bit more of all of my interactions with Supabase are custom SQL queries that either I made or ChatGPT made. You guys will see why a little bit later on in this tutorial, but it's extremely limiting not to have any of those functionalities. So instead, we're going to be using the Postgres node. And as you can see here, first of all, we have a trigger node, which we didn't have before with the Supabase. But second of all, we can execute an SQL query, or we could insert or update rows in a table. Not only one, but multiple. This is called Upsert. Now I'm going to show you guys how to connect n8n to Supabase using the Postgres node. It is a little bit more complex than most integrations are, so you might want to stay tuned. But if you already have that connected, go ahead and skip this part. All right, let's connect the Postgres node. So we'll add a quick Postgres node here. Create a new credential, YouTube tutorial. Beautiful. Now go over to Supabase, click on connect at the top, and you don't want the direct connection here. Instead, you want the transaction pooler. So you can click this little down arrow here. We'll copy the host, copy the port, which is down here, copy the database, make sure it's the same, copy the user and the password, subscribe now 123, and check ignore SSL issues, and click save. And we're connected successfully. All right, now let's create a couple of tables inside of Supabase. I'm going to show you guys how I do it. Now there's two ways I usually do it. The first way is either I write an SQL query myself, or I use ChatGPT to do it for me. And usually ChatGPT does a really good job with SQL. So usually you can just prompt it and it pops out really good. So let's imagine that we have a list of contacts that we might reach out to. We have name, email, and for now we just have the name and the email. We're going to add some stuff to it later though. So we can say, all right, let's make a table of contacts with first name, last name, email, and date added. So it makes me this beautiful SQL query here. We can copy that, go back over here, remember go to SQL editor, and just paste that in and click run. Bam! Now we have a table. It was that easy. Really quick, really simple, really easy. If we go over here to the table editor, we can now see we have this contacts table. ID, first name, last name, email, date added, right? And if we click on database, we can see how our table relates to other tables. Right now we don't have any other tables, but we will very shortly. Now let's say that we wanted to add a record using n8n, right? So we can just go here, we'll trigger manually, right? And then we'll add our Postgres node here. And let's insert a row into the table. YouTube tutorial, insert, make sure we choose the contacts table. And then here we can leave ID blank because it will automatically create. Do a first name Chad, set last name Muska, put an email, and date added, we can put today, okay? We just click execute step, and we go back to our table, click here on table editor, and now we can see we have Chad Muska. Now, say for example that we don't add a date, but we wanted to automatically add the time that's now. Well, we can edit this column right here. We can use timestamp Z, that's fine. And under default value, we can put now right there and click save. Beautiful. So now, if we go back to n8n, right, we want to add another record. We could delete date added. Here we could put like me, Austin Reed, example.com. We'll execute the step and we go back over to Supabase, gotta refresh, and we can see I'm here and now I have a date too. It automatically added the time the record was added to the database. So we don't actually have to program that in n8n. It's a lot easier to have Supabase handle that. You can also see that it put the ID by default as 2. It'll increment all the IDs there. And yes, you need the ID column. Do not delete this. This is really important, okay? Sweet. So now we can insert rows into the table. Now let's say, what if we wanted to update a row in the table? Well, we can again choose the right table and we can say where ID is 1. We can say where first name and last name is Austin. So let's do that. That's a really interesting one. Let me add one more row in this column. Let's put first name Austin and then here we'll put Powers, right? Austin Powers. Beautiful. So we add that record here. We've got Austin Powers and Austin Reed. And let's say we wanted to update Austin Reed's email to be something else, right? So we'll put first name and last name here. We'll type Austin and Reed. Now I believe it is case sensitive, so we have to put it like this. And we're going to update the email to be hello@gmail.com. If we execute this step, we can see it updated one row. And if we go back and refresh the page, we can now see it updated the right email, but it didn't update it for both Austins. Now let's say we wanted to update all of the Austins and we say like, hey, you know, we just want to delete the emails for all of them, right? Then what we could do is we could only do by first name and leave the email blank and execute the step. Okay, cool. So we can't leave anything blank because here in the SQL we have not null. What does not null mean? Not null means that it cannot be blank no matter what. So we have to put an email there. But we also have two constraints here. This constraint says that we can't have more than one of the same ID, and this constraint here says that we can't have more than one of the same email. So what I was trying to do will essentially not work. Instead, what we can try to do is update the last name of both of them to say something else. So let's try that. We'll just put test, execute step, and go back over to Supabase, refresh the page, and now they both say test here. So that's how you can update multiple records, and that explains a little bit about how these SQL queries work. Now, of course, we have to delete records every once in a while, right? So we can go delete here. Now, under delete, we have 3 different options here. We have truncate, delete, and drop. Truncate will delete the entire table and leave it blank. So it's like you take the Excel sheet, you delete everything except for the top row, and you leave it blank. Delete will delete specific rows in the table based on whatever filter you provide. And then drop will just delete the table completely to where it doesn't exist. We're going to pick delete, and we're going to select all rows where the first name is Austin. And we'll execute the step. It says it was true. So we'll go back over here, we'll click right here, and we can see we don't have 2 more rows with Austin anymore. Now let me show you guys how Upsert works. So again, we add another Postgres node. We're going to go insert or update rows in a table. This is Upsert. Make sure we choose the right table, right? And first let's add a new row. We'll go Austin Reed again. And so what this will do is if there is an email or an ID with this information, it will update the rest. And if not, it will add a new row. So we'll click execute step. All right, now we're going to delete the entire table. And the reason why is because I'd like to show you guys how relational tables work. So we'll just delete the table. And if we go over here, refresh the page, table should be gone. Beautiful. Now, this is cool, but ideally when you have a contact list, you don't just have a person, an email. You also have a company related to it. So now I'm going to say ChatGPT, hey, can you give me a new query with the same table as above, but let's add a company table that relates to it with the company name and company income? And it said, sure, creates the company table and the contacts table. If you're serious about automating with n8n and Supabase, then you have to join the free Automation Masters community. There, we're sharing workflows, answering members' questions, and even helping you guys land your own clients and scale your own automation agencies. It's completely free, so I'll see you guys there. Now I'm going to explain a little bit of SQL to you really quick. you have a contact that requires that it has a company in order to insert into the database, then you need to first make the company table, and then you make the contacts table, and then at the end you connect it. As you can see, it references here the companies table by ID right here. You see what I'm saying? This will save you a lot of data in the database, and it'll save you a lot of time when you're doing queries. Instead of having one row that says like Austin Reed works at Horizon, Eliseo Gasper works at Horizon, right? And then all the information about the company, you could just say Austin Reed 1, Eliseo Gasper 1. And that 1 relates to the other table, which has the companies. And that company table, record number 1, has Horizon Development, we make X amount a year or whatever, right? So now, primary key is, first of all, it's unique, so you can't have more than one, right, of the same record. Second of all, it's what they use to sort the database. Now, the primary key does not have to be the ID. It could be a name, right? It could be an email. And this makes it faster to query the database, because when it's a primary key, code will sort through the database faster when it's searching for a primary key, just so you know. That being said, generally speaking, you want to keep the primary key almost always as the ID. And there's a lot of theory why. I don't really want to explain that right now because that would be a whole other video, but you want to keep it that way. So here we set up our companies table. Here we set up our contacts table. Let's go ahead and pop this in Supabase and see what it does. Go to SQL editor here, right? We can create a new one, create a new snippet, paste that in there, click run, and it says success. No rows returned. We go back to our table editor, and now we have two tables here. We have companies and contacts. So now, let me show you guys what happens if I try to insert a contact into the table when there's no companies. So this actually lets us create a contact in the table. So if we go here, we now have a contact in the contact database, but it's not connected to any company at all. You might ask me why. Well, because here under the definition, we don't have not null. You see these ones that say not null, that means they're required. Company here is not required, right? So we want that to be required. So then what we'll do is we'll go back here to contacts, we'll scroll over to company, and we'll edit this column. We'll scroll down here and we'll say we will not allow nullable. Okay, so now it has to be provided no matter what. Click save, and it won't let us save because we have a record in the database right here which is already null. So we can delete this record really quick, and then we can do it again, click save, and we're good to go. So now if I go to n8n and I try to do the same thing, it's going to say you can't do that because there's no company here. Like, okay, interesting, right? So in order to do this, you have to add a company. Well, hey, we don't have a company for this person yet. Now you're starting to understand SQL a little bit. So first, we have to insert the company, then we have to insert the person. Now we could do this using two nodes, and I'll show you how to do that. But you can also do this just using one node with some clever SQL. So I'll show you guys how to do both. Here, let's add another Postgres node. Insert rows into a table, companies. We'll put Horizon Dev, and we'll put income as $3. Okay? Doesn't matter. Delete the ID, click execute step. Now we have a company whose ID is 1. So now that that's there, now we can go back here and we can add the company ID as 1, click execute step, and now we have the contact in the database, and he's related to the company, right? We can see here the company that he's related to in this contact here. So if we go over here to the database view, we can see how these two tables relate now. We can see the company ID relates right here. Now things are starting to shape up. But now let's say, hey, that's cool, but when I want to export this list for people, how is that going to work? Well, we can do a simple SQL query to combine these two tables and export the table. So now give me a quick SQL query to combine the tables into one Excel for exporting. Of course, you can say export all companies with X amount of income and people who are contacted within X time. And ChatGPT will make you an amazing query that will work really well. But now we have this beautiful SQL. We could add this to n8n, put this into Google Sheets, or do whatever we want with contacts. Or you can also use Supabase. I wanted to show you guys how to do this really quick. We can add another SQL, paste that in, click run, and it has one record. And you can see it's all in one beautiful table. Then we can click here, export, and we can download as a CSV or copy it as a JSON. So we can open that up, and we get this beautiful Excel perfectly formatted the way that we want. Cool. But the thing is we don't want to be inserting contacts like this because it's clunky and it could be error prone and things like that. So I'm going to show you a slightly better way. All right, so now I have some test data that ChatGPT generated. And basically these are 10 contacts that come with the companies, just as if you were exporting this from Apollo, right? And say we needed to insert this into Supabase so that we could then use it later. I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing this. One way is better because it's just one node, but sometimes it can be a little buggy. Usually it's not, only when it's really, really, really complex SQL queries or when like you're trying to save website HTML format or something that messes up the SQL sometimes. Most of the time, the second method is better, but let me show you the first method. So this first method would actually just be a loop over items, right? So we'd loop over items here, and then we'd say for each, and we would put here another Postgres node, but we'll do execute SQL query. So we'll just put a little bit of code in here, click execute step so it errors, because I want this JSON. Now we'll jump over to ChatGPT and we'll be like, hey, this is the previous node output. Give me some SQL to insert it properly into the table we just created. And then it gives us some nice SQL, but it's doing it like this, which is not what we want. So we want it to reference the previous node. So I told it you need to reference the previous node's output, not hard code the values. He's like, yeah, I got it. Oh, okay. So what ChatGPT is trying to have us do here is it's trying to have us do a code node that has the SQL and then just paste the query into the next node, which is really good. Honestly, it's a great way of doing it because sometimes you might get an Excel that has like a weird character, like a caret or something that could break the SQL. And by doing it this way, it actually cleans the SQL before you send it over to the next node so that it comes out really well. And you can also see here in this SQL, it's upserting, right? Upserting company and getting the ID. So that means if the company's there, it'll update it. And if not, it'll insert it in there. All right. And now it says use JSON query as the query value. So we go back over to n8n, JSON query, we'll execute the step, and it has an error, which is beautiful. So we'll paste that error in, and it's telling us that the company name needs to be unique, which does make sense because we're not going to have 2 companies with the same name. So we can run this SQL real quick in our SQL table, and then we go back and we execute this workflow again, and it says it's done. So we should actually have 10 contacts in here already. And you guys saw how quick that was. All right, and we can see that we have all of them in the table now. But, I mean, that's cool, but let's imagine that we wanted to do it with much, much less nodes, okay? So let's go ahead and wipe this table really quick. And we'll do that using ChatGPT. So give me a quick SQL to delete both tables, right? We'll go back over here to the SQL editor, and we'll run this query. And we'll go back to table editor, and now they're both empty. So we can start again. Beautiful. So now, again, we have 10 contacts. We have to enter them into the database. What do? So now we can just copy this output here. That's JSON. Be like, so I said, hey, we're inside n8n. I want a code node and a Postgres node to insert this data into the database with one query dynamically. Here is the previous node's output. We can paste it in there, hit enter. It'll give us a quick code node. So while it's doing that, we can go back over here. We can add another code node. We'll call this one format SQL. So again, this line of code here is cleaning any bad characters in the text so that it doesn't break the SQL, which is the best way of doing it. So we'll copy that. We'll go back over here, paste that in, execute that, and it does give us this long SQL query, right? Then we'll add a new Postgres node, and we'll go insert rows into the table. We'll add a new Postgres node, and we'll go execute SQL query, and we'll put JSON.query here. And we click execute step, and then we go back over here, and we can see we have 10 companies and 10 contacts already in Supabase ready to go. This is by far the better method of inserting stuff into the database using 2 nodes like this. But generally speaking, you're going to want to do less than 500 or so records at a time. If you're doing more than 500 records at a time, you can come into issues and things like that. So I've always just kind of put batches of 500 at a time. Of course, you can do more depending on the data, but to each his own. And as I said, this method will get a little bit problematic if you're trying to grab HTML from websites and stuff like that, because HTML has a lot of things that could break SQL. And so then when the SQL command goes into here, it looks all messed up. If this video helped you guys out, then you guys have to watch my video on the n8n API Masterclass. That'll make you a true beast with n8n, so be sure to check that out, and I'll see you guys next time.